So welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to look at the first part of the ruler's principle, and that is simply what we call the radar. So a quick rundown. The R of the ruler stands for radar, the U stands for understand, the L stands for love, the E for event, the R for reduce risk, and the S for system. Now, it's not to say that it's in the right sequence, in the right order, but what I want you to understand is that you have to go through the whole process before you, and if it meets all the criteria, only then will it appears on my radar. But on the radar, there's a couple of pointers that I'd like to give you. So when you set up your system, these are the pointers that you should look for. Right, and let's start with then the radar. The radar, there's actually 3 R's that's attached to the R of radar, and that is rational, reality, as well as I need to be able to prove the results. Those are the 3 R's that's going to combine in order to put that crypto, the token or the coin or the cryptocurrency on my radar. So let's have a look at radar, and I'm just going to give you a lot of pointers so that when you start setting up your system, make sure that you include this in terms of the rational part in your process or your strategy or your system. The first thing that I want to know is, how do you value the crypto? Because we need to understand that value and price is definitely not the same thing. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the market is bipolar. In other words, the market does not know what value is. They're working on price. And if the market is in an upswing, people are ecstatic and they think the thing is never going to end, and they're willing to pay whatever because that greed factor really starts kicking in, and they think this thing is never going to stop. And that is typically what happens in a very strong bullish phase. And with crypto, this happens like this the whole time. Right. So, but the opposite is also true. If you bought there and suddenly this market dropped, and it drops by 50% in a single day, and I've seen this happen, and it continues, or it drops to 82%, we're in an 82% drop currently, people get panicking. They get this depressed. It's the end of the world for them. And I can understand it because they don't understand the difference between value and price. And therefore, if you only work on price, then you're going to be in for a very, very strong and a volatile ride. Now, another point that you need to keep in mind is that you always buy fear and you sell the greed. If you remember just this rule in terms of rational, it's going to help you tremendously. And I'm going to show you that I've built a system where all of this is in the system. And that's why I can stay focused and be rational when the market goes crazy up or crazy down. And if there's nothing to do, we simply do nothing, because the system is going to be our gatekeeper and help us to stay focused on doing the right things. So let's basically ask the question in terms of rational: how on earth do you value a crypto? The main thing to me is there must be what we call a utility value. So unless I can determine that value, the usage value, there's no ways, because I can't use the intrinsic value, and I can't use other ways like I've done in the property, for example, or even in a business. Those models don't work. So you need to find another way. And luckily, because I've started so many businesses, I know how to determine that utility value. So that my primary metrics is usefulness and usage. So a question that I'd like to ask myself when I start doing my studies, because you make your money before you actually buy the coin. And one of the questions that you must include, or that I'm including, is, does this coin solve a problem worth solving? There's a lot of coins on the white papers that tells you a lot, but it's not really worthwhile to solve that problem. Or you can solve it in a normal business. Right. Another question that I think is very important is, why on earth will people use it? Because unless you find that why, and you can see that this coin or this crypto is structured and can benefit those people, what's the reason to buy it? And the next question then is, if you know why people are using it, are they actually using it? Because a lot of people say, yeah, it's great, but when they have to pay for it, you're going to find that they're not going to do it. And then another question, what's the current trend in usage? One of the cryptos that I've studied this morning, the current trend, they're in the prototype phase where the testing phase, actually, they're over the prototype phase, the testing phase. But they limit the testing to 30,000 transactions per day. But they've got contracts lined up for the first 1 million transactions per day. And then they've got contracts in place over the next 2 years, because they don't want to burden the system. They want to iron that out, of 1 billion transactions per day. Now, if there's the trend, and I can see the trend, and they can prove that trend, then I'm going to start looking at it from a rational point of view and say, okay, but there's a merit in this. And then, according to me, the ultimate beta to value in cryptos at the end is the usage. And I believe that eventually all cryptos will be valued not on intrinsic value, but the value that they can add to other people or organizations or to human society. There are two key drivers to gauge the health of investment. That is the pace of adoption and the pace of innovation. And perhaps at a later stage, we can go a lot deeper into it, because this is really, really important that we need to understand. And adoption leads to innovation, or innovation can lead to adoption, and it's not necessarily in a specific order. Right, so that is important, and it must have both. For example, when I started looking at Bitcoin, the drawback on Bitcoin is it's too slow. The network can only transact basically 7 transactions per second. But if you really take it in, if there's a lot of volume on the network, it can really slow that down to zero. But now they came with a new innovation. Several innovations, but the latest one is what we call the Lightning Network. And that is where the innovation can handle literally 1 million transactions per second, but it's not written on the mainnet. And if you start looking at that, and that is rolled out, then suddenly you're going to find that through innovation, the adoption is going to happen. And the moment that adoption happens, it's like the internet. When the internet came out, people could not see how to use the internet. But as soon as the email came out, that was the innovation that created the adoption. And now we can't see that we can live without the internet. Now, what on earth drives the value of these tokens? First of all, it's the management team. So you can immediately see in the next lesson we're going to go into understand. You need to understand who the management team is, because they're driving this whole thing. I say the management team, it's not like in a traditional business, but you need to understand that, because if you can't back on those people, it's not going to work. You must also know the use case of this crypto. And then you must be able to understand the tokenomics. In other words, the token and the economics, and how this comes together. This part, we're going to focus more on when we need to understand and how to understand the value of something. But that is what's going to drive it, right? So we need to focus then, out of this enormous amount of cryptos that are available, we need to focus on those where the risk is the lowest, and where it's got the highest possible return in terms of the opportunities that it presents us. And that is where it comes to the rational part. Let's look at reality. In the reality, the most difficult thing that you're going to find is to keep the emotion out of the transaction. And the only way that I know how to do it, and therefore I'm passing this on to you, is to do it with knowledge. So the moment that I understand something, and the moment that I've got a system, I do not need to be emotional about it. And then what I'm doing, once I understand the value and how to determine the value, I'm going to structure an asymmetrical deal. And I'm going to use uniform transactions or positions. And I think I'll show that to you, the reality with the program just now. So those are the things that I'm doing. And then in the reality, I've got a set of rules, and I'm helping you to set up a set of rules, and then you have to stick to it. So when you look at the reality, there's a lot of failures. And the main reason we want to mitigate our risk, in other words, we want to pick out of the 2,000 cryptos that are available right now, we want to pick only the top 2 to 4%, because we know from experience, and I'll going to give you some websites that you can go and visit, where the failure rate is extremely high. But I believe it's because people, and you can eliminate all of those by simply doing your homework. And then one of the things, one of the rules that I've got as an example, and I'm going to give you this as well, or at least take you to the site, where you'll see that the moment that MLM, multi-level marketing, is driving the IPO, I'm not interested, because in reality, we can see that this is where the biggest failure rate is. I'm not saying that is for each and everyone. I'm just saying that in general. So when we look at the results, right, I'm using the system as my gatekeeper. And if there's a positive result, I'm going to buy, because everything is built into my system. And if it's negative, then I'm not going to buy. So let's quickly go and have a look at some of the websites. So when we look at this, we can see that there's more than 1,000 cryptocurrency projects that basically fail. Now, we need to stay realistic. In other words, we can say that currently there's 2,074 registered cryptocurrencies. There's 1,000 that did not make it. And we need to find what's the main reason for that. Basically, the moment that it's a pump and dump, that this is what they call it, and the majority of them is through MLM, multi-level marketing. So we need to factor that in when we build a system. The system is my gatekeeper, and that's the way that I see it. So if we look into this, and this is a demo, so I'm not showing you my ticker symbols. On this one, and this is what I mean with the asymmetrical. So I've got 38 uniform positions. Let's assume it's $1,000, but it can be $100, or it depends on your budget. But for now, I'm going to say it's $1,000 each and every one. Right. So in this case, over the last 2 years, this one grew from 1,000 to 38,511. This one was negative. In other words, my $1,000 is only worth $215. But this one is positive, and my $1,000 equals $21,156. Now, if I go to Excel, and we assume that we had 38 of these uniform positions, and only these 3 gave me a positive result. In other words, the rest failed. It's a total disaster. But check here, this 1,000 equals 38,000. This one only 215, and this one 21. So I've got 59,883 return for investment of 38. And for that reason, I can structure, because I eliminate 98% of all the cryptos before we even start with this process, but just following the process that I'm busy sharing with you right now. And this means that if only 3 succeed, I've still got a 57% growth, which is incredible. Now, let me take you through and show you how simple it is, because we buy when everyone is fearful, and we sell when everything goes and everyone is on a high. Okay, now how does this play out in a system if you build it correctly? Let me go and show you. Now, of course, I need to hide a lot of information. I just want to show you the outcome. And the outcome is the opposite. So when I'm getting a lot of buy signals, it means that the market is in a bipolar negative state of mind, where they say, no, it's the end of the world. And as you can see, the actions, it gives me buys right through. But if I go and I look at my monitored position, the one that I'm checking, there's a hold, buy, hold, buy, hold, or wait, hold, and buy. This simply means that for this specific one, the first one, everything is lined up, everything is in place, but the signal, in other words, the tokenomics does not add up. And that is what I mean with the gatekeeper. I really hope that this helped you, and that you can see why it is so important. Because remember, we are making our money before we actually buy that coin. And I'm waiting for that coin to get to my price. I'm not going to buy that coin unless that coin comes down to my price, because I know how to value it, number one. And secondly, when it gets to that point, I know that I'm busy with an asymmetrical investment, and that is the smallest chance that I'll be able to lose my money, because there's always a chance. But I make provision for that by eliminating 98% of the cryptos, only focus on those 2 to 4% that meets my criteria, and I'm sharing my criteria with you so that you can build it. I'm not going to give you the tokenomics on how I evaluate. That's my intellectual property. But hopefully this will help you to be in a position where you can see that this is a reason why the Dreyer crypto strategy is working, and this is a reason why we're getting the results that we're getting. So in the next lesson, we're going to move to the U of the acronym understand. And this is perhaps the most important part, but all needs to line up, and you've just seen how it lines up in a system, and it boils down to, is it ready to buy, or must I wait, or must I sell? It's that simple. And now, how do I know that the market is in a desperate state and, in angry and flippin' fed up and think it's the end of the world? When I see this, I know that this market is in a free fall downwards, and we make our money when everyone else is panicking. And this is what I wanted to bring to you. And this is the power of having the Dreyer crypto strategy, or a system like this. Right, I'll see you then in the next lesson.